Good afternoon. Welcome to the May 4th session of the Cape Cod Regional Government Assembly of Delegates. Before we begin, I'll mention that this meeting is being recorded. It's also being recorded by members of the media if they come back into the room. So keep that in mind. Okay, first order of business will be a moment of silence to honor our troops who have died in service to our country and all those serving our country in the armed forces. Okay, we'll now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will call the roll.
Richard Anderson.
Here.
Cheryl Andrews.
Here.
Ronald Bergstrom.
Here.
Leo Kukunis.
Here.
Chris Kanega. James Killian.
Here.
Marcia King.
Here.
Thomas Lynch.
Here.
Teresa Martin.
Here.
Deborah McCutcheon.
Here.
Spiro Mitropoulos.
Here.
John Holman.
Here.
Paul Pilcher.
Here.
Anthony Scalise. Julia Taylor.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, we have a quorum present with 92.72% of the delegates present.
Thank you. Now need approval of calendar of business.
Move approval of the calendar of business.
Second.
Okay. Okay. Any changes? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I'm staying. I didn't get a chance to read it yet.
Okay. Well, the calendar of business is what's in front of you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can abstain on the journal. Okay. We now need a motion to approve the journal of April 20th, 2011.
Mr. Speaker, on the, I have an amendment to that, or
Yep.
correction. On page 6, it's addressed as Ms. Anderson, when it should be Ms. Andrews.
Oh,
Near the
okay.
top.
Oh, you have a typographical error.
Typographical error. If we get that corrected, I'm sure both the Mrs. Andersons will be happy.
Okay. Do I have approval of that?
I'll second that as
Second the, and do I have
amended.
as amended? We have approval. All those in favor of that amendment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Now I need a motion to approve the amended version of the
Motion
calendar.
to approve the amended Journal of April 20th, 2011.
Second.
All those, any additions or corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, communications from the Board of Regional Commissioners. I see we have the chairman of the board here.
We didn't do anything today.
The microphone, sir.
Want me to talk?
Some of your ears are
So,
very seasoned. I can praise
What you're
them.
saying, it was a normal...
The evil that men do
normal
lives
day
after
in the
them.
commissioner's life.
Ah, yes. Another cheerful Wednesday. We did get a lot of visitors, though, but unfortunately, because I was traveling, I came in after they all spoke. But the last guy was quoting Homer, and I'm just wondering, whether or not we're getting involved with the liberal arts and Greek mythology. And I thought that was sort of an uplifting kind of a thing. Oh, who knows? Okay, well, have at it.
Do we have any questions for Commissioner Doherty? Yes. John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Commissioner Doherty, as you were aware because you attended part of it, we had a public hearing today on the 2012 budget, and there were some significant differences between the revenue projections of your budget and what your department had said in two specific cases. One was the revenue of deeds, the Registry of Deeds, and the other one was the Fire Training Academy. The department heads came up with significantly smaller revenue projections than is in your budget. Have you reconsidered? Can you reconsider? What thoughts do you have on those? It amounts to about $435,000 less than you put in your budget. $375 on the Registry of Deeds and $60 grand on the Fire Training Academy. Are you aware of those? Were you aware of those when they were going on? And what are your
What did I know and when did I know it? I believe that this has been discussed with Mark and with you, and I believe that Mark's position in this, based upon my personal experience with him, is, goes over the last 12 years, I guess as long as, the same period of time.
Bill, this is our 15th year together in county.
Is that right? 15 years, jeez. Time does fly when you're having fun. But seriously, my comfort with his revenue projection is based upon the experience that I've had. I do recall that I did take economics in school, and that economics are best when viewed as an obituary about what has happened, rather than a completely accurate forecast of what might happen. But so far, based upon experience, I would be comfortable with what Mark is suggesting. Now, having said that, if in the event there was let's say a variance that occurred that did not support Mark's revenue projections, I believe then it's the obligation of the commissioners, using normal variance techniques, to identify those areas that needed to be cut during the year, in order not to get into a serious deficit situation.
So your preference, should this unfortunate event ever come to pass, would be to cut the budget and not attack reserves. Is that correct?
That would be my inclination. But remember, I am, although the chair and powerful beyond belief, there are two other commissioners, and they certainly would weigh in as to what their opinion would be.
Okay. All set? Is anyone else having questions for the commissioners? I have a question. It's been quite well over a month, maybe a month and a half, since you announced the formation of a committee to review the county operations with great fanfare, and landed with a bit of a thud here in the Assembly. But I ran into Senator O'Leary over the weekend, and he was walking around this big room saying, "Where's my charge? Where's my charge? What's going on? I've talked to Henry Rauschenbach. We don't know what we're doing." So is there been a lack of follow-up on this from the commissioners?
Now, was this at some extremely partisan meeting that you went to that represents your political affiliation? I only go to extremely
partisan meetings, Bill.
I raised that question myself today because Mark was charged with sending that information over to Rauschenbach and Rob O'Leary, and he assures me that it was sent over. Now, I have been very fond of Rob O'Leary over the years, but I must say that he may have gotten it, but as busy as he is, it may still be in his inbox. But Mark has been charged with following up as to where that particular document is, but we did ask, and we're assured that it had been sent over.
Now, would Mark consider sending one over here? If he has an extra copy?
Send it over here. You mean, well, I could ask him.
Yeah, okay, that would, yeah. Tom?
In last year's budget, as you know, the EDC was moved under the county commissioners and pulled out of the budget and is not reflected anymore.
The license plate funding.
The license plate funding. And I offered an amendment which was accepted by the Assembly, that we would receive a report on the expenditures and of that particular group now that was under your guise, and I was wondering if we would see that by the end of the fiscal year.
I am meeting with them tomorrow afternoon, and I certainly would pursue that because I had been looking forward to that myself. Okay.
Anything else? Yeah, Leo?
Go back to the Finance Committee's chair's question in regards to the revenues projected in the budget. I believe there are $410,000 under the registry, and then $370 or $390 under the registry tax, and the additional fire training, which I think was 40, projected about 40 over. It's almost $900,000 of money. And I understand your answer to the gentleman's question was that and everybody's answer seems to be that we feel comfortable with Mark's projections. Speaking as one member of this assembly, and not having been that well known with Mark, only having been here for 3 years, Could you think you, or through your other two members, give me some kind of projections on why you feel comfortable with that increase, especially in this, what I feel is a down economy, and what I feel is obviously it doesn't even look like we're going to be making the projections of the 2011 budget. And here we are increasing the 2012 budget by almost $900,000. This is more of a comment than a question that I want you to answer right now, but I believe you will be hearing some more concerns from other members of the Assembly in regards to this. And in order to set them at ease, and certainly I'll speak for myself, to set me at ease, I would appreciate if I could have some kind of answer on why you people feel comfortable with that increased projection. Do you know something, or you obviously must know something that I don't, because I'll have to tell you to the date, today, I do not feel comfortable with that projection. And what I'm trying to do is reach out to you people who know a lot more than I to make me feel comfortable and explain to me why you do. And again, I don't expect an answer today, Bill, but I think the next time we meet, and I think there are other members here that have equal concerns, and I would hope that they would join me in that request to give us a little explanation on why you think it's an okay projection.
Okay, to respond to what I thought was a question in the beginning, I think that I was asked that and answered it, with regard to my confidence based upon experience. However, I would be happy to consult with the other two commissioners, and I would share your concerns with Mark about coming up with something that would be would help ease your mind with regard to his projections.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else from anyone? Well, thank you, Bill. Give our regards to your fellow members, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks, if not sooner. Okay. Do we have any communications from public officials? Hearing none, do we have any communications from members of the public? Okay. Well, therefore, I will now convene the Assembly. We'll begin by a proposed resolution 11-01, which was submitted by Delegate Pilcher. You have it written in front of you, and I'll turn this over to Paul if he wants to give us an explanation.
Well, I think it's fairly straightforward. I guess I discovered after the fact that I apparently had voted for the resolution 2 years ago that established alternates when there were no alternates to committees. But it seems to me that my experience both as an alternate and a regular committee member this fall and this spring has been very frustrating, in that at present alternates, we have two alternates for the standing committees. They can come to the meetings. If there is not a quorum, then one alternate is invited to sit in the committee to form the quorum. If there's not a quorum, the alternates may or may not participate, depending on the discretion of the chair, but they have no voting rights. And it just seems to me that, number one, I don't know of any committee meeting where this year where we've required an alternate to form a quorum. So it seems to me if we're going to have alternates, if you come and you sit in the meeting, you should be able to participate in the meeting, and you should be able to vote if you're replacing a regular member. If we're not going to have alternates fulfill that function, then I say let's not have alternates. I mean, it seems to me a ridiculous proposition to ask people to come to a committee meeting and get filled in on what's going on, and yet they have no participation unless there are only 2 members of the 5-member committee. So my resolution was simply to change that status so that if you are an alternate to a committee and you come and replace a regular committee member, you would, for that meeting at that time, you would have full participation and voting powers. And if there's more than one alternate and there's only one regular member absent, the committee chair would have the discretion to determine which alternate was seated there, and that would be the procedure going forward. I'm not necessarily wedded to the specific language, but that was clearly the intent.
Okay, do we have any response to that, Leo?
I have a question and a comment. My question would be, Paul, you mentioned that this, we voted a resolution in establishing alternates. Would this resolution now be replacing that one, or is it in addition to it?
There were actually, as it turned out, I think there were multiple resolutions. There was one for each standing committee. When I wrote this, I was not aware of that, so I wrote just a general resolution that would replace that and would supersede that for all standing committees. I'm happy to go back if the Assembly wishes and write however many resolutions would be required for each standing committee, but that was the process that happened 2 or 3 years ago, because I think there was a concern, as I recall it, over whether or not committees could function if they didn't have a quorum. I don't see that concern being one that's translated into reality this year.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, as a comment, I'm happy with just voting on this. Again, I only asked as a procedural thing. I kind of understand where you're coming from, and I do agree with your concerns. I don't think it's proper to ask an alternate to come to a meeting, or if they happen to be present, to sit down and take a chair or a position for someone that was unable to attend, and then that person not be able to fulfill their obligations as a committee member, which includes voting and adding comment. I don't think it would certainly, I believe this is being an oversight too, because I certainly am listed as an alternate on a number of committees, and would feel very angry if I had been called up on my cell phone and asked to make a meeting because I'm the designated alternate, and I dropped whatever I was doing and came to that meeting, found out that there was a quorum, so they didn't really allow me to participate or vote. I just don't think that's right. I think that an alternate is in fact someone who steps in and takes over a full person's, full committee member's position because they're unable to make it, and subsequently should be allowed to have the input of a full committee member. Certainly alternates, if the full committee is assembled and there's no need to have an alternate, then alternates are welcome to sit in the audience or sit up here, as it were, and participate as a member of the public, but not as a member of that committee. But once they're called to sit at the table and become and fill in, they certainly should be allowed to have the full benefits of a committee member. So I'll support this.
Yeah. Deborah?
I would suggest, I support this too. Excuse me?
Turn the microphone on, please.
I thought I did. I support this too. I would suggest that we add a sentence at the end as a friendly amendment to say that resolutions 903, 904, 905, 906, and 907 are hereby repealed, so that we avoid confusion in the future as to what the intention was with this resolution.
Accept that amendment.
Okay. If you offer that amendment, it's been seconded. This would amend the resolution that's on the table. It's not necessarily approval of the resolution. It's simply changing the language. You understand that? Okay. So all those in favor of that amendment say aye. Okay. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Paul, John, did you have something?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure. I can't support this as it's written, but what we did in 2009 in those 5 instances, in those 5 ordinances, was to make sure that we had a quorum. And there was an issue in the past of quorum-related things going on in the Assembly, which hasn't happened since this new and vibrant Assembly has come to be. But I'm very comfortable. I think the ordinance actually says the chair will have discretion whether to ask that a member sit because there are quorum problems. But I don't feel like I'm doing undue harm to anyone that decides to wander into a meeting for whatever concerns they have or issues that they have and not be able to vote. I think that we do a fine job with the quorum. I think it said in that same ordinance that we passed in '09 that the committees could be as little as 3 and as many as 5 at the discretion of Mr. Bergstrom. So I'm comfortable with the status quo. I don't see any reason to change it. We performed very well today with 4 people out of 5. I didn't feel any. I asked for the opinions of the 2 alternates that happen to be in the room. I think it's a status quo is just very well thought out, and I don't see any reason for change.
Yeah, let me give you a little bit of the background of this. I don't know, it was 2 years ago. Just the budget process before the previous resolutions were passed. Diane, the then clerk, came to me and said she's having a heck of a time getting people to these meetings, and we were under some time constraints then, too. In other words, we were projecting out the budget process. It might have gone to reconciliation. She needed the committee members to meet, and come 2 o'clock on a Wednesday, she would get responses from people and they wouldn't be there. So, and to cancel the meeting, she had to reschedule it, and sure enough, it really was tough because, as you know, there's some of you belong to multiple committees, and the next week maybe there was meeting in another committee. So she was the one that recommended this, and the idea was that not to have these people come in, but to simply say, if we need someone else to sit there as an alternate, if we can only get 2 people and we have to have this meeting, I can call so-and-so who's, designate someone rather than just call someone. At that point, I could designate someone right in the seat of my pants and say, you need someone, okay, all of a sudden, Cheryl, you're on the Finance Committee, you show up, So to avoid that, we wanted to put people specifically designated for those committees. Now, I don't know how it goes town to town, but in some places they have something called associate members. And associate members, for instance, are people who are sort of in the bullpen. They're waiting, they go to conservation meetings, they go to zoning board of appeals meetings, they participate in the meetings, but they don't vote. It wasn't the intention of having the alternates be associate members in the sense that they would sit there and participate in the deliberations. The idea was they would be available to make a quorum if one was needed. Now, I'm not speaking for or against this resolution. I'm just explaining exactly how it arose and why we did what we did. Paul?
It just seems to me really quite absurd that if you only have 2 members of the committee, you call in an alternate who makes the third, and the alternate can vote. But if you have 3 members of the committee, you don't call in the alternate, or you do call in the alternate. In many cases, that's happened. An alternate has been called. They participate, but they can't vote. So it seems to me either you are or you aren't. If you're an alternate and you're filling in for a regular member, you should be able to vote at that committee meeting. Or if we don't want the alternates to be able to vote, then let's not have them. That's the way it seems to me.
Cheryl?
At the risk of possibly just pointing out the obvious, I've certainly served as an alternate. I did on a couple of boards in Provincetown, and absolutely, we didn't call them associates, but often if you had members that had been there 3 or 4 years and a new member was applying, even if there was an opening on the committee, the Board of Selectmen typically would put the new member on as an alternate. They get to go and vote at every meeting, but they would wait and sort of test them out a little bit. And typically the alternate did show up at every meeting because you never know if someone's going to be late, if there's going to be a problem. So fundamentally, my first point would be, I understand the history. I appreciate the history so that I understand what the conversation was at the time. But what you invented wasn't an alternate. What you invented, I don't even know what to call it. I've never heard of it. Well, I've never heard of it. An alternate is a member of the committee, but they're an alternate member. And they typically put it in their schedule, which I do, and take an afternoon off from work and plan to drive down here and be here. Well, that's what an alternate is. So when I was asked, appointed as an alternate, that was how I assumed it, because that's what I'm used to at the town level. That's how alternates function. What you've now presented is totally different. So I hope that people think about this and think about 2 things: whether you need alternates. If you don't, get rid of them. If you do need them, then have them serve as alternates. If you're going to call somebody an alternate, then treat them like one. And then lastly, I guess it begs the question, what's everybody so afraid of about letting an alternate vote? It's kind of an interesting question, and I would ask you to ponder it. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
I don't like to be a pain, but I would like to point out, well, I'm going to anyway. I think there's a real misapprehension about what the prior resolution said. If you look at them, it says, "The Speaker of the Assembly shall also appoint 2 alternate members to serve on the standing committee. The alternate members shall sit as a member of the standing committee in the event there are regular committee members absent and a quorum is needed to conduct a public hearing or act on time-sensitive matters." When you say shall sit as a member, it doesn't mean shall sit as somebody who's got a gag in their mouth and can't vote. It says shall sit as a member. So, you know, to a certain extent, what Paul's doing is really just a clarification of what this actually says. It sounds like there's a practice that's grown up around it that is just kind of weird, because the language here says the alternate member shall sit as a member of the standing committee in the event there are regular committee members absent and a quorum is needed. So you got to put him on a committee. You don't get to just appoint somebody from the audience.
The thing is, it says, though, it limits it to if a quorum is needed. That's the language.
And that's a real distinction, which, so that if you don't have enough people to have a legal meeting, then we're sticking in the extra alternate. And I guess what do we need? 3 to have a legal meeting? So then if we had 3, then they wouldn't sit because we wouldn't need them. But I think this is what we need to resolve, because the language is a little ambiguous. It does say you shall sit if needed as a quorum. I think the question is, do we want to have them sit if there's simply a substitute issue for the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th member? And I can see some reasons for that, in that it might encourage people to come to the meetings and they'd learn something at the different meetings that they were an alternate for, and then they would be better prepared to someday serve on that committee. So I see that as a reasonable thing to do. I guess there's no point. I guess, I don't have the amendment in front of me, the whole thing in front of me. Is that what it says? If there's a missing member,
yes,
the alternate sits and votes? Is that what it says? Okay.
You know, Janice brings up a good point. Now I was going to bring it up later, is that if you've been involved in this, as most of you have, for a number of years, you know there's been various legal opinions from the state as to what constitutes an open meeting. If, for instance, for a long time, if you missed a meeting and a subject was continued and you showed up at the subsequent meeting, you couldn't vote on it. In other words, you couldn't participate unless you had participated in all the meetings on that topic. Now, they fudged on that. I'm not sure I know exactly the wording of the new resolution, but so now you can, I think there's a little wiggle room. Maybe one of the lawyers in the room, Chris isn't here, but you can help me on that. But you have to be careful that you don't have different people participating in the same subject if a meeting is continued to the next week or the next month.
I think some of that's when it's an adjudicatory, some regulatory body.
Yeah, you don't think
Conservation Commission, ZBA, something like that.
Yeah, you don't think it would apply to us?
But I'm wondering on the practical application of if someone's sitting for 3, 4, or 5, as a member, what happens if you wander in late and you're the committee member? Does someone slide out and you slide in, or you just say, gee, I missed my chance, the committee meeting started and the alternate's now seated and I should step aside? I think I'd like some direction on that, but I think Julia's framed it right. I think the original intent, as just was read, was fairly clear. It was to form a quorum. And I think the practice had been that if a regular member came and, more than a quorum was established, the member just sat and voted and just participated. It wasn't that they got bounced once the other person came, even if they came in late. But now, there could well be merit to individuals sitting on meetings with us, and then, as you say, if you were looking for Finance Committee members or Natural Resources next time, you found out someone was a regular alternate participant, you might want to appoint them to that.
The only other thing I bring up, Adam, is that there are 15 of us, and there are, 6 committees? I mean, so, and there's 5 members of each committee, 6 on the Government Regs Committee, so all of us are on overlapping committees. If you expand the number of potential participants, in a sense, by giving them full voting rights in more often, we're all going to be sort of, it's going to sort of lose that idea of specific people looking at specific areas, and we're all going to be sort of generalists, and more generalists than we are, because we're going to have more responsibility. I mean, we'll be on 2 committees, and then we'll be an alternate here and an alternate there, and keeping up on that. So, I mean, I'm probably going to abstain on this, because I'm too close to it being the appointing authority, but I think you should look at it in its original purpose and its totality. Whatever you decide is fine, but, this, as long as it works, that's as long as it works. Anybody else on this? Marcia?
Because what you just said a second ago, I think you're right. I think we're all going to be on 15 committees. And if you read the resolutions from 09, they say the committee can be 3, not 5. Why don't we just make the committees all 3? With then 2 alternates, and then you have, I mean, because I think you're right, you're going to be on 15 committees, and it's going to be kind of crazy. So, I think the committee should be made smaller, and then leave it at that. And I'm not sure, because then I think the problem won't be, you won't need an alternate, you only need 2 people then to meet a quorum.
Okay. Anybody else here? Yeah, Janice.
I also want to point out that on the proposed resolution that's before you now, the first statement reads, appoint 2 alternate members to serve on all standing committees. And I think just technically, the reason why we've got 5 resolutions is because there are no alternates to the government.
The vice chairman.
So technically, looking at this, I would interpret it and say, you've got 2 alternates on that as well. And if the intent is not to have it on government regs, then...
Cheryl?
Thank you for that. Clerk O'Connell. I will therefore add a friendly amendment that after the phrase to serve on all standing committees, we add except government regs. And I have one other comment, but I'll wait until after that.
I'll need a second on the motion.
Friendly amendment.
I'll accept the amendment as a friendly amendment.
May I ask a point of order?
Yeah.
I don't think a motion was ever made originally I don't think, was a motion ever made originally to bring this resolution forward? I know we made an amendment a minute ago, but
You might be right.
I don't think anyone ever made a motion or a second or ever voted, so I
She's right.
need to stop and go back and do that, if anything.
You asked...
I will make that motion.
To describe what he wanted, and then they start going with amendments.
I will make that motion.
Okay.
To accept this.
I have a motion to put this on the table. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Okay, now we can open up for discussion.
At the risk of getting myself booted off the Finance Committee, I'm going to say something that I have to say. I respect, even though I know there's a lot of different issues here, the issue about overlapping committees, I respect the point, what the delegate from Mashpee was just saying as far as numbers. Given the fact that we don't seem to have quorum issues this year, I don't understand why you voted to have 2 alternates in the first place. Why don't you have 1? If indeed you had talked about having committees with 3, why do you need 7 people? You don't.
The reason
And most committees, most regulatory committees that I sat on had 5 members, 1 alternate. The only exception was zoning, which had 10, because they circle, and that's a different thing.
All right, the reason was...
I'll bring that discussion point.
Just going back, the reason was when the previous clerk, Diane, was involved in this, and she had these quorum issues, oftentimes they wouldn't arise until the last minute. She'd be sitting here at 2 o'clock, she had a meeting at 2:30, and now she realized she's only got 2 people coming, so she would have to make a phone call to somebody. Now, who's sitting by their phone all day waiting for a phone call? So the idea was if we only had 1, the chances of us getting somebody would be pretty slim.
Mr. Speaker?
But the ones that would be there.
I would like to withdraw my motion for the time being.
Okay.
And I will go back and rewrite it with the friendly amendments added, and also be willing to entertain any suggestions from other delegates.
You won't get an argument out of me.
I'm not. I wasn't necessarily looking at you, but and resubmitted it.
Who seconded that? Who seconded?
Withdrawal?
you'd have to withdraw your second.
I yield to Mr. Pilcher's.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks, Paul, and right, once we get the budget settled, we'll sub this again. Well, do we have any reports from committees, Mr. Holman? Nothing today, you say?
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Committee met today in a public hearing to discuss the 2012 budget. After much deliberation, the Finance Committee voted 3-1 to forward it to the entire Assembly as presented in its entirety. That being said, we had substantive issues, and many of you were here for that, but for the general public out there, we had substantive issues with the way that the revenue side of the budget was projected, and we have serious concerns that those projections will be met. But since this is such uncharted territory for the Assembly and the Finance Committee to challenging the revenue side of a budget, we decided to let the Assembly become the committee of the whole when discussing the budget in 2 weeks. That being said, what I would like you to do is relook in the budget, because if you don't believe the revenue figures, some of us believe that they may be $400,000 short. Some of us may believe that they are up to $900,000 short. We did question the finance director, Mark Zielinski, the county administrator, and he stood by his figures to the penny. And he has had a tremendous track record over the last probably 18 years of meeting those goals. And he presented us with some statistical data that was beyond my comprehension.
No, as long as they have it.
That backed those up. I've subsequently asked the chairman of the county commissioners, and he once again said the same thing, that they stand by their revenue figures. So that being said, I would like to invite the entire Assembly as a whole to become the Finance Committee looking forward in 2 weeks, and come very prepared to either accept those budget revenues as stated in the budget, or come up with appropriate cuts that they may deem necessary to help balance that budget. Thank you.
Could I ask a question, since I was unavoidably delayed and unable to attend? I'm sorry I wasn't able to be here, so I apologize for having to bring it up. I remember that there was some discussion in our committee about the salaries increases, relatively routine ones. Did that come up? Was there any discussion other than the revenue side of proposed cuts, just so I could be aware of them?
We came up with a plethora of thought processes, actually, regarding any cuts that could be made. One was the restudy of the MEP process that was proposed by the Comprehensive Wastewater Committee of $100,000. There was concerns as to whether or not towns large and small, east and west, would buy into that $100,000 study as an answer to their very serious questions about the accuracy of the data from MEP. That was one. The COLAs came up, and I'm going to once again talk to the Finance Director, Mark Zielinski, about the number of COLAs. They are going to reinstitute a COLA of 2%. He said that that would be between a $50,000 and a $75,000 part of the budget that is already in there. There were some discrepancies from some of the members that were not on the Finance Committee that thought that that number was exceedingly low. So that's another number that could be there. There was a lot of discussion about the ongoing but newly funded process for the Human Services grant studies of $178,200, whether or not those would be targets for cuts. There was discussion about Meals on Wheels either being cut back to last year's $50,000 or raised to $100,000 because of the necessity of that program in comparison to federal grant cuts. There were others. There was not.
We asked Leo to do that.
Yeah. The Commissioner's budget indicates that that in the revenue, in the deeds revenues, that they will increase this year by $375,000 on the sales side, and on the fee side, they'll increase actually by $410,000. Mr. Mead, when he testified before us in the committee, did not seem to think that those were accurate. He stood by his original numbers, which would right there produce a shortfall of about $745,000. And it's daunting, for one thing. Once again, and I must say that Mr. Zielinski, in his testimony, right there with Mr. Mead at his side, confirmed that he believes that his numbers are accurate and defendable. And he's had a 18-year track record to rely on for that, and I respect that from him.
For the new members, I mean, we're going through this process for the first time. You know, the commissioners is the executive branch. They have a handle on how much it costs to run the fire training academy, how much it costs to run the human services, and so they submit a budget based on their estimates of expenses and also recommendations of new expenses. But it's the assembly that passes the budget. We're the legislative branch, so we pass the budget, and we will pass a budget probably 2 weeks from now. And that will be the budget, and the commissioners can sign it or not sign it. And if they don't sign it, then we go into a reconciliation process, which is going to be very abbreviated because they gave us the budget a month late. But I don't want the Assembly to be forced into making decisions based on time frames, because this is the main responsibility we have, is to pass the budget, and we should look at it in that regard. Some of the issues that came up in the Finance Committee meeting, and John has touched on them, is the anticipated revenues, which is something that has not been breached in my experience. I know people have been here longer, but we usually take the estimated revenues and we dicker with the budget, adding here, subtracting there, and so on. So this is new ground. It's one thing to say we don't accept your estimates, but then we're sort of obligated to make our own estimates. And since Mark is in the estimating business and we're not, we have to sort of come up with some juice behind our estimates to make them rational, or we can put money in contingencies. So it's a big responsibility. When I first I had passed out the relevant language in the charter, and also the resolutions to pass in the time frame. When I came into this meeting today, I was prepared, if the Finance Committee had voted to reject the Commissioner's budget on its face, I was prepared to suggest we have a special meeting next week and look at the budget, and that would give us another week. And we could still do that, but now we have a recommendation from the Finance Committee. Now, John said that the Finance Committee voted to pass this to the Assembly. Well, guess what? We're going to get it whether they pass it to us or not. It's not an option. So passing it to us without changes, I mean, you all heard what John said, but I mean, so their budget now is the one that's going to be before us, and we could pass a budget. If we passed an alternative budget with two-thirds of the weighted vote, that would indicate that we have enough votes to overcome the Commissioner's veto. If we were to pass an alternative budget with less than that, and they did not sign it, then we go into reconciliation. So I'm just passing this on to everybody. And have any comments or any suggestions if you feel this process could be done better? Leo.
Because I expressed my uncomfortableness, I guess if that's the correct word, and because there are some new members that maybe aren't familiar with the process that we will be doing in 2 weeks from now, with them having the right to offer amendments, and those amendments being discussed and either voted in or out, and subsequently we will work through it and come up with a budget. Is there a consensus of the board, through you, Mr. Speaker, to maybe just have a working session next week on our off week for those delegates that may want to come in and throw some ideas around? Nothing like a Finance Committee meeting, but certainly this way here we won't be broadsided in 2 weeks from now with 14 different Assembly members bringing multitude of amendments and maybe dragging our meeting on into the wee hours. It's just a suggestion. I mean, I certainly would attend if we had some kind of a budget working session.
Well, I mean, I have no objection to people getting together, but if we have a quorum, it has to be a posted meeting. That's right. But also the advantage, you know, we have all had the budget for a while, and you know, I don't go through every line. I rely on the major numbers, the presentation by Mark and the commissioners, and also the recommendations of the Finance Committee when they're presented in open session. So I would think that if we had a meeting and we're all going to come here, we might as well vote on it. I mean, if we had a meeting and voted on it next Wednesday, we could put it in the, whatever we present, we either pass it as it's presented, or if we passed an alternative budget, that means that the commissioners would have it on the 18th. And if they vetoed it, we could then deal with it, so.
I'm not available next Wednesday. That's not to say I object to having a meeting, but I would not want to vote, and I think it would be inconvenient if I didn't vote. That would screw up the whole planning.
Paul?
Well, I don't have any objection to a meeting next week. I also would not be available either. But
well, no wonder you don't have an objection to it.
I'm going to be in New Hampshire. But it seems to me that the meeting would only be really fruitful if we got either at that meeting or somewhere before then some feedback from the finance director and the county commissioners if they were going to cut. If they were faced with the prospect of having these large cuts, are there places that they feel could be cut? Because so far we haven't gotten an answer to that. All we've gotten is, you know, that the revenue stream is going to be fine and everything should be passed. And yet somehow I don't feel that I always have the expertise to determine we'll cut here, we'll cut there, we'll cut there. I would like some feedback from them.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
I too would not be available next Wednesday, okay, and I kind of strenuously object to scheduling this important a meeting on this kind of notice. You know, that we're supposed to, we have a schedule for the first and the third Wednesdays in the month. I put those into my calendar for a year in advance, and, you know, I plan to be here. But making this kind of an important meeting on this kind of notice, I can't do it.
That's understandable. John?
To answer the delegate from Wellfleet's questions, we did ask that directly of the finance director, and he, once again, stood by every dime in his budget. But he also did something I took some comfort in, is saying that they do monthly updates on the revenue side of things to make sure that they don't fall into a situation where they face serious deficit cuts. Essentially, if they had to cut, say, $500,000 out of this $27 million budget, okay? It's better to do it in August than in January, and it's better to do it in January than in March. So they do monthly updates. They talk to the revenue stream of everybody in every department on a monthly basis so that they know what to do. And he said that he would be doing those updates repeatedly and to avoid any serious late happening deficit.
If I might, I mean, I agree it's better to do it in August. I think it would be better to do it in May and follow the procedure that some on your committee were suggesting of either somehow putting money in reserve or putting forward the promise that if the revenues then turned out to be better than we anticipate that they will be, that we would pass ordinances that would restore some of these programs.
Well, I'm comfortable. I mean, given that there wasn't any specific recommendations to the Finance Committee, I'm comfortable staying with our regular schedule and voting on a budget 2 weeks from today. And then, because that's our obligation under the charter, we have to take action on the budget before June 1st, which we will do. After that, it's anybody's guess how long that process would take, but we'll do what we can. Cheryl?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a question to the members of the full members of the Finance Committee. I know I'm fresh. Stop. I remember sitting with Mr. Mead at the table the first time when he said his projections for the coming year were flat, in contrast to what was in the budget. But what I'm hearing today is not, it's confusing to me because I'm hearing from the Finance Committee members that one of you is tending towards thinking this budget's $400,000 out of, that's not defensible, and someone else is saying $800,000. That's where I'm a little confused. I understand the discrepancy with Jack and the fire, but that's very small. Where's the other 400 coming from that people are talking about?
It's the fees. I mean, there's two pieces from the registry. One is the tax, and one is the fees. And if you look, and the...
I recognize that. Mr. Speaker, did Jack suggest that the fees were, he didn't defend those either? Did he say both of them? I thought he just said excise. He said
I
both?
think he was talking generally. In public service, we asked him about both, and he said that he did not give those numbers to Mark on both. So I think that the question is, there is obviously some probably increase. So the low, you could, if you add that plus the fire training, which we're saying is about $40,000 overstated, you could be upwards of about 825. So it's probably between 200 and 800 is really what the numbers are.
The other thing you have to consider is that before the public hearing today, 2 weeks ago or a week ago, they had meetings of the chairs of the committees. And the chairs of the committees all voted out their sections of the budget as presented by the commissioners. So now, obviously, the Finance Committee is looking at revenue projections, which is a little different issue. But in a better world, if we were going to lower the budget, the chairs of the committee would have to go and they would look. I don't want to take the decisions out of the hands of the subcommittees because that's been an issue in the past. So we'll do what we have to do. But I would be not only prepared to ask to have Mark defend his numbers, I would be prepared to defend whatever numbers we come up with as much vehemence and accuracy as he does. It's one thing to say we think you're wrong. It's another thing to say we think we're right, So that's the only question I have. Cheryl?
And just sharing what I've learned from this short process, I would call your attention to what I heard on the radio today from our Registry of Deeds, which is this month is down 12% compared to last year. And so, we are not in a position of projecting with 100% certainty what's coming. And you have, from my perspective as a new member, I'm seeing two people who, are both pretty talented and have tons of experience with this, and they disagree. So I'm not so sure it's up to me to defend a number. I think it's more a question of taking input from the experts that have testified to us. And right now we have two, and they disagree.
Okay. Leo?
In lieu of the fact that we're probably not going to have a working session, could I at least request that any members that are bringing forth an amendment to the budget bring it forth in 2 weeks from now in writing so that it can be shared with all of us and we won't be wasting time trying to figure out exactly what you're talking about, whether in the areas that you either want to delete or add money. If that's okay through you, Mr. Speaker, to request that. It just seems that the process will go a lot faster if we get 15 different motions or requests. Thanks.
I agree with you, Leo. The only question I have to ask, and I probably know what the answer is already, is if we recommend amendments that affect specific departments, should we have the people here? In other words, if you make an amendment, let's say to cut $100,000 from wastewater, something you may have looked at, should we have the wastewater people here to say this is why we asked for the money, or should we just, assume that we've all educated ourselves well enough to make those decisions?
If, Mr. Speaker, if you're asking me that question, I would just safely say that I think the budget is what is on our agenda. We're discussing it. There were a number of department heads here today that heard concerns of areas, and that it would be their due diligence to attend in 2 weeks. In fact, if, their budgets are put on a chopping block. I don't think it would be the obligation of us to now put the word out that that's what we're thinking of doing. Again, amendment can be made in 2 weeks, and it can be voted up or down. I think it would be the obligation of those parties to be here.
Anything else? Well, okay, I guess we'll rejoin this discussion in 2 weeks. Bring your bring something to eat. If you're here until midnight, you might get hungry. Do we have any other reports from committees? Okay, do we have a report from the clerk?
Just a brief one. I want to remind everyone that I'm using... I need to? I just want to remind everyone that I've got that new process, so if you haven't checked your folder in the bin, please do so before you leave. And I will make every effort to get the report of the Finance Committee from today's meeting to all of the Assembly members before you meet on the 18th. That's 2 weeks from now. That shouldn't be a problem. But understand that you're getting a report that has not been certified or made official by the Finance Committee. So there might possibly be items in that report that may not be totally accurate, that may need correcting or revision. If you're on the committee and you find something that you think isn't quite right, please call me. My door is open. Come and call me if there's an issue or something that you want to go over or bring to my attention. But that's about the best I can do with regards to getting you some information from the Finance Committee today with regards to what took place, but it's not official.
Okay. In that regard, and following on something that Leo asked a month or two ago about minutes of meetings, when do we approve the minutes of meetings? For instance, let's say the Public Services Committee meets. Well, they might not meet for another month. Do we really should approve the minutes? The question is, what's a procedure we could use? We could have them come in 5 minutes before a regular meeting, sit and approve the minutes and pass them out. I don't think it would do us any good to have a committee as a part of the committee of the whole discuss and approve their minutes in an open session. But I'm throwing this out there. I haven't got the ultimate answer, but at some point, I think I agree with Leo, and to make Janice's job easier, I think that we should, if she's going to produce minutes of a meeting, they should be approved, and probably the easiest way to do that would be to have the committee meet 5 minutes before the thing, sit down, present the minutes, pass them, and that would be it. I don't know if we don't need a notice for that. Do we need a notice for some committee meeting? Yeah, we might have to.
Well, yes. Yes.
Yeah, but we'd have to.
Call them a draft.
Oh, yep.
Just as a suggestion, and I mentioned this before, how we used to do it at the Cape Cod Commission was that at this time in the meeting at the Cape Cod Commission, the chairman, and I'm going to use the Finance Committee for example because we happen to be talking about that. Chairman of the Finance Committee, the minutes went out 2 weeks ago. We had time to review them. The chairman would look and see if the members were here, and they would be on our agenda approval of minutes, and the Finance Committee chair would take the mic and say, I'm just asking the Finance Committee members now, you had 2 weeks to review the minutes. Can I accept or approve or change them? And then they would vote right then and there. It only takes a minute. They would say, we vote to approve. Once that's done, the speaker would ask, does the Standing Committee on Governance have minutes to approve? They would look to see if there's their quorum. Yes, we do. And it's done very, very quickly. And that way there, the members don't have to come in early or not. We're here now. And if there's not a quorum, what happened at the Cape Cod Commission is they would wait. And the chairman of the Finance Committee would say, well, my committee's not here today, so I'll take it up in 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, he would do it then.
That seems like a good idea, but the only thing is, if somebody who's not on the committee says anything, then I have to throw a little piece of paperclip at them or something like that.
Well, it's up to the chairman to make sure who's voting.
Okay. That's what,
Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I hate to throw a wrench into this, but I think we should check the open meeting law, because you're having people voting for different hearings, different committees within a committee of the whole.
Yeah.
So, you know, if someone's out there and they want to hear the minutes and they don't know that the minutes are being voted upon, what's going to happen then?
They're not public, released to the public until they're voted. Public
Yeah.
has no input in the minutes until they're voted.
Well, I could check that out with the
Yeah, I would check it out. I don't think we should run afoul of the open meeting law.
I think, to answer that question, I think we would list them on the agenda, that they would be up for adoption, so that the minutes of blah, blah, so we'd have to, just under the report of the clerk, if that's where we're going to be, you know, adoption minutes of blah, blah, blah committee, and that way it's published. But I think your concern is well taken. I think that's the way to get around it, make sure it's on the agenda.
It's amazing, as we look at this, how many things we haven't done in many years. You know, you go into the procedure, it's hard to say where these procedures started, like tradition, who knows who started them, but there they were, you know, so. Okay, do we have anything under other business? Okay. Next order of business?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Very good.